In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces swept across Europe toward Berlin, something extraordinary was happening thousands of miles away in the American heartland. Behind barbed wire fences in rural Kansas, Texas, and Wisconsin, hundreds of thousands of German prisoners of war were being held in camps that stretched from coast to coast. But this isn't a story about captivity. This is the story of those who refused to accept their imprisonment, the men who planned daring escapes from camps that were supposed to be escape-proof, and the incredible journeys that followed. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about prisoner of war camps on American soil. Most people don't realize that during World War II, the United States held over 425,000 German prisoners of war within its borders. That's right, nearly 500,000 enemy soldiers were detained in more than 500 camps across 46 states. These weren't small operations. They were sprawling facilities that transformed quiet American towns into unexpected frontline territories of a different kind. And while the Geneva Convention mandated humane treatment, it couldn't suppress the human desire for freedom. For some prisoners, the thought of escaping consumed their every waking moment. The story begins in 1943, when German U-boat crews and Afrika Korps soldiers started arriving in American ports by the thousands. The War Department faced an unprecedented challenge. Where do you house hundreds of thousands of enemy combatants in a country that had never dealt with anything on this scale? The solution was both practical and bizarre. They built camps in the most remote, inhospitable locations they could find, places where escape would seem impossible. Death Valley, California, the deserts of Arizona and New Mexico, the frozen plains of Montana and North Dakota. The logic was simple. Even if a prisoner managed to break out, where would they go? They were thousands of miles from home, in a foreign country, speaking a foreign language with no resources and no help. But the War Department underestimated the determination of German military culture. These weren't just soldiers. Many were highly trained officers, submariners, and paratroopers who had been indoctrinated with Nazi ideology and taught that surrender was disgrace. For them, it was their duty to escape and return to the fight. Even more compelling, German military law required POWs to attempt escape if possible. It wasn't just about personal freedom. It was about honor, duty, and proving that the German spirit couldn't be broken by captivity. The first major escape attempt that caught national attention happened at Camp Papago Park in Arizona in December 1944. This wasn't a spontaneous jailbreak. This was a meticulously planned operation that took months of preparation and involved some of the most elite prisoners in American custody. Papago Park held U-boat officers and crew members, men who were experts in navigation, engineering, and covert operations. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the cream of the Kriegsmarine, accustomed to operating in tight spaces, solving complex problems under pressure, and working as a coordinated team. The ringleader was Captain Jürgen Wattenberg, a decorated U-boat commander who had already attempted one escape from a camp in Canada before being transferred to Arizona. Wattenberg was a true believer, a committed Nazi who saw escape not just as a personal goal, but as a continuation of the war effort. He gathered a group of like-minded officers and began planning what would become the largest POW escape in United States history. Their plan was audacious. They would dig a tunnel from one of the barracks under the fence and emerge 178 feet away in a dry riverbed outside the camp perimeter. From there, they would make their way to Mexico, which was only about 200 miles south. In Mexico, they believed they could contact German sympathizers or diplomats who would help them return to Germany via South America or Japan. It sounds like something out of a Hollywood movie, but this was real, and they almost pulled it off. The tunneling operation began in September 1944. Every day, while some prisoners distracted the guards with sports activities, choir practice, and theatrical performances, others worked underground. They used stolen tools from the camp workshop, smuggled knives, and even sharpened spoons to dig through the hard desert soil. The tunnel was barely 3 feet high and 2 feet wide, so cramped that men had to crawl on their bellies to move through it. They shored up the walls with bed slats stolen bit by bit from bunks throughout the camp. They created an air circulation system using stolen pipe and tin cans. They even built a small cart on rails made from bed frames to haul dirt out of the tunnel. But here's where it gets really interesting. What do you do with tons of excavated dirt when you're in the middle of a camp with guards watching? The Germans got creative. They hid dirt in their pockets and scattered it during recreation time. They mixed it with coal dust and dumped it in the coal bin. They even created a fake garden and used the dirt as fertilizer, claiming they wanted to grow vegetables to supplement their rations. The guards, seeing industrious prisoners trying to improve their diet, actually encouraged this. They had no idea that beneath their feet, a tunnel was snaking toward freedom. By December 1944, after 3 months of grueling work, the tunnel was complete. On the night of December 23rd, 25 German prisoners crawled through the narrow passage and emerged into the Arizona desert. They split into small groups and scattered in different directions, some heading for Mexico, others for the mountains, still others trying to blend into Phoenix's small German-American community. For a brief moment, they were free. The escape triggered the largest manhunt in Arizona history. The FBI, military police, local sheriffs, and even Native American trackers fanned out across the desert. Roadblocks appeared on every highway. Train stations and bus depots were put on alert. The War Department was terrified that news of the escape would leak to the press and cause public panic. Imagine the headlines: 25 Nazi submariners loose in America. The propaganda value to Germany would be enormous. What the escapees didn't count on was how impossibly difficult it would be for Europeans to survive in the Sonoran Desert in winter. Yes, winter. While Arizona isn't freezing, December nights drop to near freezing temperatures, and these men had no proper supplies. Most had only managed to smuggle out a bit of food, maybe a stolen coat, and improvised compasses made from watch parts. They had studied maps, but studying a map and actually navigating 200 miles of desert are very different things. Within 48 hours, most of the escapees were recaptured. They were found stumbling along highways, dehydrated and exhausted. Some were spotted by ranchers. Others were turned in by Mexican Americans in border towns who were loyal to the United States despite sharing a language with some German immigrants. The captured prisoners were bedraggled, sunburned, and suffering from exposure. Their grand adventure had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. But here's the twist that makes this story even more remarkable. Captain Wattenberg and 2 other officers managed to evade capture for over a month. They had planned better than the others, stashing supplies along their intended route in the weeks before the escape. They moved only at night, hid during the day, and used their naval training to navigate by the stars. They made it within 60 miles of the Mexican border before they were finally caught in January 1945, half-starved but defiant. When interrogated, Wattenberg showed no remorse. He stated flatly that it was his duty as a German officer to escape, and that he would attempt it again if given the chance. The Americans were both frustrated and grudgingly impressed. They transferred him and the other ringleaders to maximum security facilities, where escape would be virtually impossible. But the Papago Park breakout became a legend among POWs across America, proof that even in the most secure camps, with enough planning and courage, escape was possible. The Papago Park escape wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern. Throughout the war, there were over 2,200 documented escape attempts from German POW camps in the United States. Most were quickly thwarted. Some were almost comical in their failure, but a few were genuinely remarkable feats of planning and execution. In Camp Tonkawa in Oklahoma, a group of prisoners spent months studying the habits of guards, the timing of head counts, and the weak points in the fence. They discovered that during shift changes, there was a 3-minute window when certain sections of the perimeter were unwatched. On a moonless night in September 1943, 4 prisoners cut through the fence and vanished into the Oklahoma countryside. They had stolen civilian clothes from the camp laundry and even obtained a small amount of American currency by trading cigarettes and homemade crafts with sympathetic locals who worked in the camp. Their plan was to make it to the Gulf Coast and somehow stow away on a ship bound for South America. It was wildly optimistic, but they made it surprisingly far. They traveled by night, stole food from farms, and even hopped a freight train heading south. For 11 days, they were free, living like Depression-era hobos, constantly looking over their shoulders. They were finally caught near Dallas when a suspicious police officer noticed their odd accents and nervous behavior at a train station. Despite their recapture, their escape became a morale booster for POWs in other camps. If 4 men could stay free for nearly 2 weeks, anything was possible. One of the most bizarre escape attempts happened at Camp McCain in Mississippi in 1943. A German prisoner named Hans Werner Krauss became obsessed with the idea that he could disguise himself as an American soldier and simply walk out the front gate. This sounds insane, but Krauss was clever. He worked in the camp tailor shop and had access to American uniforms that were being repaired. Over several weeks, he secretly reconstructed a complete U.S. Army uniform, complete with proper insignia, badges, and even forged papers that identified him as Corporal James Wilson from Ohio. On a humid July afternoon, Krauss put on his uniform, forged a signature on a pass, and walked confidently toward the main gate. He saluted the guard, presented his papers, and casually mentioned that he had business in town. The guard, seeing a properly uniformed soldier with what looked like legitimate paperwork, waved him through. Just like that, Krauss walked out of a prisoner-of-war camp in broad daylight. For 3 days, he lived in Meridian, Mississippi, eating in diners, sleeping in a cheap hotel, and planning his next move. His English was good enough to pass casual inspection, and his confidence sold the disguise. But he made a fatal mistake. He got drunk in a bar and started bragging to another patron about how he had fooled the Americans. Unfortunately for Krauss, the patron was an off-duty military policeman. His incredible escape ended in handcuffs, and he spent the rest of the war in solitary confinement. But not all escape attempts were about returning to Germany or escaping to neutral territory. Some prisoners simply wanted to experience freedom, even temporarily. They knew they would be caught eventually, but the psychological need to be outside the fence to make their own choices, even for a few hours, was overwhelming. These escapees would break out, spend a night in the woods or a day in a nearby town, and then surrender or wait to be found. It was less about grand strategy and more about asserting their humanity and agency in a situation where they had none. The American response to these escapes evolved over time. Early in the war, security at POW camps was relatively lax. Guards were often older men unfit for combat or young soldiers waiting for deployment. They didn't take the German prisoners particularly seriously. After all, these men were defeated enemies, thousands of miles from home, with no hope of actually making it back to Germany. What were they going to do? But after Papago Park and several other high-profile escapes, the War Department overhauled security procedures. Fences were reinforced, guard towers were added, searchlights swept the perimeters at night. Regular head counts increased from twice a day to 4 or 5 times. Informant networks were established among the prisoners themselves, offering rewards like extra cigarettes or better work assignments for those who reported escape plans. The Americans also started segregating prisoners by ideology, separating hardcore Nazis from those who were anti-Nazi or simply war-weary. This segregation revealed something fascinating about the German POW population in America. Not all prisoners were die-hard Nazis eager to escape and return to the fight. By mid-1944, as it became increasingly clear that Germany was losing the war, many prisoners were actually relieved to be in American custody. They ate regularly, weren't being bombed, and worked jobs that were far safer than combat. Some openly stated that they hoped the war would last as long as possible, so they wouldn't have to return to a devastated Germany. This created tensions within the camps. Hardcore Nazis viewed these men as traitors and cowards. They intimidated them, sometimes violently, to maintain discipline and prevent collaboration with the Americans. There were even murders in some camps, prisoners killed by their own countrymen for being too friendly with guards or for refusing to participate in escape attempts. The Americans had to conduct trials and even executed several German POWs for murdering fellow prisoners. It's a dark chapter that complicates the narrative of POW camps in America. Despite the security upgrades, escapes continued. One of the most daring occurred at Camp Chaffee in Arkansas in August 1944. 2 prisoners, both former Luftwaffe pilots, managed to steal tools from a maintenance shed and cut through the fence during a severe thunderstorm. The storm was perfect cover. The noise masked the sound of cutting, the rain reduced visibility, and the guards were huddled in their towers trying to stay dry. The pilots made it to a nearby airfield where small civilian planes were parked. Their plan was absolutely audacious: steal a plane and fly to Mexico. Both men were experienced pilots who had flown combat missions over England and Russia. A small civilian plane would be child's play. They selected a single-engine Piper Cub, climbed into the cockpit, and prepared for takeoff. But they had overlooked one critical detail. The plane required a key to start, and that key was locked in the hangar office. Frustrated and with dawn approaching, they abandoned the plane and fled on foot. They were captured 2 days later, hiding in a barn 30 miles from the camp, still wearing their muddy prison uniforms. The audacity of attempting to steal an airplane captivated the American public when the story leaked to the press months later. It was the kind of bold, almost cinematic escape attempt that seemed to confirm stereotypes about German military ingenuity and daring. But it also reinforced the reality that no matter how clever or brave these men were, geography was their ultimate prison. Even if they had gotten the plane started, where would they fly? American airspace was heavily monitored. Any unauthorized aircraft would have been intercepted immediately. This geographical isolation is what made POW camps in America fundamentally different from camps in Europe. In German-occupied Europe, an escaped Allied POW could potentially link up with resistance fighters, blend into civilian populations, or make it to neutral countries like Switzerland or Sweden. But a German prisoner in America had no such options. There were no resistance networks to help them. The civilian population was overwhelmingly hostile or indifferent. Neutral territory was thousands of miles away across oceans or deserts. Yet the escapes continued because they served a psychological purpose beyond the practical goal of freedom. Every escape, even failed ones, was an act of defiance, a way of maintaining dignity and military identity in captivity. It was a message to the guards, to fellow prisoners, and to themselves. We are still soldiers. We have not surrendered our will. We remain dangerous. In this sense, the escapes were as much about morale and propaganda as they were about actually getting away. The most successful long-term escape from an American POW camp wasn't about elaborate tunnels or stolen planes. It was about patience, planning, and an almost supernatural ability to blend in. In September 1945, just weeks after Germany's surrender, a prisoner named Georg Gärtner escaped from Camp Deming in New Mexico. Unlike most escapees who were recaptured within days or weeks, Gärtner remained free for 40 years. Yes, you read that correctly. 40 years. Gärtner's story is extraordinary. He was a former ski instructor from Bavaria who spoke excellent English and had a talent for mimicry. He understood that the key to successful escape wasn't dramatic action, it was invisibility. Rather than running for the border or attempting some grand gesture, he simply walked away from a work detail, changed into civilian clothes he had hidden, and disappeared into American society. For the next 4 decades, Gärtner lived under assumed names in California, Hawaii, and Colorado. He worked as a ski instructor, a bookkeeper, and even a translator. He married, though he never told his wife his true identity. He paid taxes, obeyed laws, and lived a quiet, unremarkable life. The FBI had closed his case in the early 1950s, assuming he had either died in the desert or somehow made it back to Germany. In 1985, Gärtner finally revealed himself. By then he was an elderly man. Germany had long since been reunified and denazified, and the war was ancient history. He contacted the U.S. government and turned himself in, partly because he wanted to clear his conscience, and partly because he wanted to claim Social Security benefits under his real name. The government, not quite sure what to do with an 85-year-old fugitive from a war that ended before most Americans were born, decided not to prosecute. Gärtner spent his final years as a minor celebrity, giving interviews about his remarkable life on the run. He died in 2009, having spent more time as a free man in America than he ever did in Germany. Gärtner's story is an outlier, but it illustrates an important point. Successful escape wasn't about physical prowess or military training. It was about psychological insight, patience, and the ability to adapt. Most German POWs who attempted escape were caught quickly, because they acted like escaped prisoners, nervous, furtive, moving at night, avoiding people. Gertner understood that the best disguise was normalcy. He acted like he belonged, and so no one questioned him. By late 1945, after Germany's surrender, the entire dynamic of POW camps changed. The war was over. Germany was occupied and divided. There was nowhere to escape to and no reason to try. Most prisoners were now focused on repatriation, desperate to return home and find out if their families had survived the war. But repatriation was a slow process. There were logistical challenges, political complications, and debates about how to handle former Nazi party members. Many German POWs didn't return to Germany until 1946 or even 1947. During this limbo period, escapes became rare. Why risk punishment and delay your return home for a futile gesture? But a few diehards still tried, driven by pride, ideology, or simply an inability to accept that the war was truly over. These late-war escape attempts had a tragic quality to them. Men fighting a battle that was already lost, refusing to accept reality. The legacy of German POW escapes in America is complicated. On one hand, these men were enemy combatants. Many of them committed Nazis, who had fought for a regime responsible for unspeakable atrocities. Their attempts to escape and return to the fight, had they succeeded, would have meant more American deaths. There's nothing romantic about that reality, but on the other hand, these escape attempts reveal something profound about human nature. The refusal to accept captivity, the drive for agency and self-determination, and the power of loyalty and duty, even when misplaced. American guards who dealt with these prisoners often expressed contradictory feelings. They respected the prisoners' courage and ingenuity while despising what they had fought for. There are accounts of guards helping recaptured escapees back into camps, treating their injuries, even expressing admiration for their tenacity. War creates these strange moments of human connection across enemy lines, where you can recognize bravery and determination in your opponent, even as you work to defeat them. Today, many of the POW camps from World War II are gone, torn down, or converted to other uses. But a few remain as historic sites or museums. You can visit Camp Papago Park in Arizona and see where the famous tunnel was dug, though it's long since been filled in. Interpretive signs tell the story of the escape, and local historians have preserved photographs and artifacts from that era. It's a strange experience, standing in the Arizona sun, looking at the remnants of barbed wire and foundations, trying to imagine what it must have been like for those men, digging in the darkness, dreaming of freedom. The story of German POW escapes in America is a footnote in the larger history of World War II, but it's a footnote worth remembering. These weren't the great battles that decided the war's outcome. These weren't the strategic decisions that shaped the post-war world, but they were moments of intense human drama, individuals making choices that defined who they were and what they believed in, even when those choices were ultimately futile. In the end, geography won. Not a single escaped German POW successfully made it back to Germany during the war. The ocean was too vast, the continent too wide, the odds too impossible. But they tried, and in that trying, they wrote a chapter of history that reveals the complexity of war, the persistence of hope against overwhelming odds, and the eternal human desire to be free. You can click in these other videos if you like this one. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel for more history documentaries.